Found. It worked. Okay, just weird. Let's turn on the sound. Yeah. Can you guys hear us online? Thanks, Matt. All right, well, we'll get started. We have a few people in the room today, a few people online. Thanks for participating in this hybrid format today. Welcome to the third Drought Task Force meeting. For those of you that could be here in person, thanks for joining. And thanks for joining those of you online as well. My name is Kat Weissmiller, and I'm the section chief for water supply planning at the Colorado Water Conservation Board. My section helps to plan and respond for drought conditions when they escalate, and we've been facilitating these meetings. As a reminder, on Tuesday, March 16th, Governor Polis activated phase 2 of the State Drought Response Plan and formally initiated the Drought Task Force with the mandate to meet within 30 days. The first Drought Task Force meeting occurred on April 10th. The second was on May 7th, and this is the Drought Task Force's third meeting. Next slide, please. We have a full agenda for today's meeting. We're going to have a drought conditions update from state climatologist Rush Marker, along with a brief wildfire outlook from Vaughn Jones, the section chief of wildland management at the Division of Fire Prevention and Control. There will be time for questions for both of those. Then we'll have some time for agency report outs. And then we will hear from Ben Felt, an aquatic biologist at CPW, about the effects of drought on fisheries, recreation, and fisheries management in Colorado's northwestern region. After that, we'll transition into a presentation from Chris Sorensen at DHSEM on what is needed to move to phase 3 of the Drought Response Plan, located in the Enhanced State Hazard Mitigation Plan. What is in phase 3 and the procedural guardrails there. There will be time for questions and discussion after that presentation. And then there's time on the agenda for the task force discussion about formally recommending to the governor that the state move to phase 3 of the Drought Response Plan. We'll end our meeting with updates from the work groups and next steps. To note, we set aside some time on the agenda for verbal public comment requests, and we received 2 that were forwarded to the Drought Task Force. I think that's it for this slide. And with that, we have 2 guests, as I mentioned, state climatologist. Wow, I'm having a hard time speaking today. Russ Schumacher to give us an update on the latest drought and water supply conditions. And so I will turn it over to Russ.
Okay. Can they hear me? Or should I join the Zoom and talk into my computer? No, you can hear me fine. Okay. Okay, good. I'm here in the room with them, so hopefully everyone can hear me all right online. Okay, we can go ahead to the next slide, or to my first slide, I guess. And you can, I probably don't need my title slide. Probably skip over that too. Sam, yeah, you can skip that one. Cool. Okay, so this is the map showing the U.S. Drought Monitor as of the last Drought Task Force meeting a few weeks ago, as of May 5th. So at that time, we had over half the state in D3 or worse conditions, the extreme drought or worse, and 17% in the D4 category, exceptional drought. And so you go ahead to last week's map, which shows that some of those areas have decreased. So we've seen improvements, especially in northern Colorado. So across northwest Colorado, which had a wet end of April and through May, and then across Larimer County and then out into parts of the eastern plains. So those areas had good rainfall in May that I'll show a little bit later. So the D3 or worse area is reduced down to about 40% of the state now, but still 77% of the state in D2 severe drought or worse. Drought worsened in parts of southern Colorado, especially the San Luis Valley, which had a dry May. So that's the map as of last week. So we can go to the next slide, and there's the change map over the last 4 weeks. So that's the kind of the end of April to almost the end of May. And you see those improvements in northern Colorado, some like high elevations, Larimer County in the North Park with 3-class improvements in May with how wet it was, and 2-class improvements in northwest Colorado. A couple of huge rainstorms out on the eastern plains that improved things there, but then you see the degradations in the yellow and orange, especially in the San Luis Valley and in parts of the southeast plains that missed out on those better rains in May. So next slide. Here's the snowpack map. I mean, the snowpack is we see out the window and from the graphs is almost gone. The meltdown continued through May as it typically does in May. We had a period of fast melt with some heat earlier in the month, slowed down a little bit later, but there's not all that much left. 15% of median as of today. Not record low anymore for late spring, but not very far above it. So next slide. So now it's probably more important time of year to be looking at stream flow rather than snowpack, since we've mostly melted the snowpack and now we're seeing what's happening in the rivers. And so I'll show a few river systems here. If you're interested in other ones, we have these same graphs on our website. These look a little bit like the snowpack graphs where the historical averages are in the green for different periods of record. The record high year is the blue. The record low year is in the solid brown, which at most of these rivers was 2002. And so that's a good point of reference here. And then the black lines are this year. So here's the Colorado River at Cameo, which I guess the other point to make is that most rivers would peak this week, or maybe next week, depending on exactly where you are. Some maybe last week, but this is the time when the peak flow would be happening right around now. So there's the Colorado at Cameo, which is tracking 2002 very closely. So it seems that for the Colorado River, 2002 is going to be a pretty good analog year. Some locations probably run a little bit worse, some others maybe a little bit better, but that's kind of our worst year on record in most places, and that looks like we're going to be pretty close to that, especially on the Colorado. So this is the Arkansas now at Salida, which is lower than 2002 currently, although they still up in the headwaters have more snowpack now than there was in 2002 at the beginning of June. So I think their peak has not happened yet in the Arkansas. It tends to peak a little bit later, but still very low for early June. Next one this is the White River at Meeker, which is in totally uncharted territory. This spring, late April, early May was way below any previous year. They got a second peak there in the middle of May, and now it's come back down. There might be one more little bump up over the next week or two, but way below 2002, or in this river, 1977 was the record low, and it's way below that. So next slide, and then the last one here is the Rio Grande, which we can hope for it. I mean, this is a relative bright spot. Certainly wouldn't call it a good news in an absolute sense, but in a relative sense, the Rio Grande is not faring as badly as some of the other river systems. So their peak was a couple of weeks ago, certainly on the early side, but nowhere near record low, way above 2002. So again, if we're looking for any sort of bright spots, that is probably it. I think it was helped out at least by how wet it was. You can see the flood peak back in October from the huge rainstorms, and then that kept the soils wet through the winter. So maybe that boosted the runoff efficiency a bit in the Rio Grande, but now it's low for this time because it would normally be peaking about now. Okay, next slide. So here, I'll just leave this up here for a minute. This is our kind of at a glance for the water year so far. On the top is the temperatures for each day going back to October 1st and where they were with respect to average. And then how each month ranked, and then the bottom is sort of the, I don't know, balance sheet for water, for precipitation, over the water year of either, if it's green, it was briefly above average back in October, and then you just kind of see the continued declines. And, you know, looking now through this data was almost through the end of May. May in a lot of places we saw was a pretty good month and saw improvements, but mostly it just kept things from getting worse at the state level overall. You know, we didn't like make up the deficits in any big way, it just kind of kept them from continuing to get worse. May was closer to average for temperature. Those numbers will come out soon, kind of where it ranked. But that was a nice change of pace compared to how warm all the previous months in the water year were. So you can, I think there might be a couple little boxes here as you click forward, but yeah, so there's our where we're at. And as a reminder, December and early January, super warm. And then we had the big heat wave in March, which I think is another box that'll show up there, but you can go ahead. So here's the map of precipitation in May, at least preliminary numbers. So again, we can see those spots in northern Colorado that were quite wet, northwest Colorado, northern Front Range, and pockets of the eastern plains. Last week, finally, southeast Colorado had a very nice, cool, wet day, where a lot of places got an inch or so of rain, which was much needed, and hadn't been a day that, you know, normally you get some days like that in the spring, and there hadn't really been any until last Wednesday, so that was good. Southwestern Colorado was quite dry in May, and the next slide just shows the percent of average. So we kind of see that the greens here are where it was wetter than average in May, the browns are where it was drier than average, and if you look close, you can see the drought monitor outlines on there as well. So southeast Colorado, you know, those greens only were not there until Wednesday last week. So that's nice to see, but still very dry on the longer term in that area. Okay, next slide. So just looking forward now, starting later this week, like Wednesday, Thursday, and through next week, we're going to go into an extended period of above average temperature. Still a little unclear like how hot it's going to be into next week, but it's going to be a period of warmth for sure. It doesn't look like the humidity is going to go super low. It's like eastern Colorado will still get rain chances, I think, through that whole period. Next couple days, there's going to be storm chances on the eastern plains. This tends to be a wetter time of year on the eastern plains. This is we're going into the driest time of year in western Colorado. Like June is the driest month almost everywhere on the western slope. So you know, just kind of keep that in mind that it's not uncommon for it to be dry at this time of year, but obviously it's been dry for a lot of the time leading up to this. The next slide then shows this probability of being below, near, or above average precipitation over the next 15 days. So it does look like it's going to be drier than average most places over the next couple weeks. But again, keep in mind, western Colorado, the average is pretty small, so being a little bit below is not that big of a difference. It may be more meaningful to be below average on the eastern plains, but we'll see what the next couple of days get, because this time of year, thunderstorms, you know, these are locally, this may not turn out this way, but it does look like we're going into at least a tilted towards warmer and drier pattern for the next couple of weeks. Next slide is the outlook looking out even further. For June, July, August, this is the temperature outlook. I put the little pin there at Granby because the state outlines are not on there. So you can see, so that's close to where we're sitting right now. So for temperature, tilted towards above average temperature for the summer season. That's in line with trends. Our summers are getting warmer. Next slide shows the precipitation outlook, which does tilt towards the wet side. It's not a super strong signal, but the models and the outlooks have been pretty consistent in showing an active monsoon season. Now the monsoon in Colorado doesn't really get started till like mid-July generally. So June might be dry, but there's still time to be wet after that on the western slope. So that's kind of where that is. El Nino, everyone's asking about the El Nino, the super El Nino, whatever. The El Nino is on its way. It has the potential to be very strong. This shows the probability of being in the different categories of La Nina or El Nino. The like dark brown is the super El Nino, the very strong El Nino category, which you can see there's maybe a 25-30% of that chance of that happening by winter time. So El Nino's effects tend to be strongest in the fall and beyond, and so this is not El Nino coming in is not going to save us from the problems we're going to have with the stream flows and the water supply this summer. But maybe by later in the summer and into next fall, then we'll get more of that relief. Plus, if the monsoon's active, that may at least help a bit in that realm. And then showing basically essentially a guarantee that it'll be El Nino next winter. But the connections between El Nino and winter snow here are not super strong. Tilts us a little bit towards the wet side, which is good. But that's something obviously we'll keep an eye on going forward. So takeaways: water year through April has been by far the warmest on record and among the top 10 driest. May was not as extreme. It was more normal, which was nice to see. And some areas got really beneficial rain. The river flows are going to be extremely low into the summer. They already are low. They're going to stay low. So that is going to have drought impacts in the next few months. And then the El Nino plus the active monsoon gives some reason for optimism in the longer term. And I think the last slide is just my, this was the one other thing that I wanted to bring up here. So our office was getting contacted, especially in April and early May, contacted by the county commissioners from several counties in southeastern Colorado. That was, when things were in that full-on flash drought of all the warmth and no rain. So we were getting requests from the county commissioners in several counties about the drought monitor and reporting significant ag impacts like reduced forage, high hay prices, expected limitations on irrigation water. I think if you click, I guess it's there, but anyway, I guess it didn't come through in there, but it was just I can share those if anyone on the task force is interested in what those letters had to say that have those. But yeah, it was Otero, Broward, Los Animas, Crowley counties. They did finally get some rain last week, which is good, but I don't know that that's going to offset these big concerns that were there, in the last month or so. So then the last slide is my contact info. I think everybody in the group here knows how to get in touch with me now, but there's my info on our website and such. Happy to take questions if there are any.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So if you get those letters from our commissioners or maybe anyone else concerned about water related to the drought monitor, does that just mean that you would consider that and make your recommendations to the drought monitor? And I guess I am more curious as to, why would that be important to the county that the drought monitor reflect what they were saying?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And so some of this has to do with, I think they didn't say this explicitly, but my assumption is that this has to do with the fact that if a county goes into D3 conditions on the drought monitor at any time, it increases the eligibility for relief payments for livestock producers, the USDA's livestock forage disaster program. So if a county goes into D3, then the eligibility for those relief payments gets loosened, gets made available. Essentially, there's other triggers also, like if you're in D2 or worse for 8 weeks in a row, I think, I can't remember the exact number, or some fraction of weeks out of a number of weeks during, and it has to be during the grazing season. That's the other part, but so anyway, so these county commissioners were specifically asking for D3 to be reflected on the map. We assume for that reason, but in some of those places, the conditions were, a couple of the counties actually had already gone into D3 by the time they sent the letters, and so the conditions were very much supportive of that at that time. But I also responded and said, just kind of explanations of here's how the drought monitor process worked, which is based on how rare the conditions are. It's sort of not necessarily like how bad the impacts are. It's like how rare the impacts are, how rare the conditions are that bad. But coming back to your very first question, Tracy, we absolutely use that information in the process. Like, it's data driven first of all, but like sometimes the data doesn't match up with what people are seeing on the ground. And when you start getting messages like this, like, that it's bad, because that is not something that we routinely see. And so that's the first time, at least since I've been in the role since 2017, that we've had that sort of communication from counties like that. I mean, we get ag impact reports during drought pretty regularly, but that's sort of a new thing that we've, that the county commissioners, like, in their, like, these were like official, like, they voted on it and it was like an official declaration or whatever from the counties. So things are getting bad when they're that concerned about it, presumably because the commissioners are hearing from the ag producers in the county of how bad things are getting. And Robert organized a webinar last week with the ag cooperators, and I gave a talk there, and there were some other presentations as well where people were sharing some of these reports as well. So, long-winded answer to your question, but it's, hopefully that helps kind of, because it's, we're sort of trying to figure out what to do with this as well. I think some of it also comes from, like it says on the Drought Monitor website, like, for local conditions, contact your state climatologist. So that's, I'm guessing, why they were contacting me.
Okay.
But we do coordinate the recommendations from Colorado for the Drought Monitor, so it's helpful. But that's why I mostly try to, emphasize that those ag impacts reports are extremely helpful, because it's, we can't be everywhere and there's not data everywhere, and knowing what people are seeing on the ground is very useful.
Russ, with those ag impact reports, are those the ones that you submit like through that portal, or is it a different format?
So that was the other thing I encouraged is anyone can submit reports through it's CMOR through the university, like the National Drought Mitigation Center in Nebraska. So anyone can submit ag impact reports that way, with photos and with, they ask, like, when was the last time you saw it this bad, things like that, that are helpful. Or if people are COPRAS observers, they can submit condition monitoring reports that way, and we see those too.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Russ? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your report. Next up, we have Vaughn Jones from the Division of Fire Prevention and Control to give us a brief update on the wildfire conditions and outlooks. And I believe Vaughn's online.
Yeah, thanks. Good afternoon, Kat. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vaughn Jones with DFPC, and quickly, we're the state's fire agency. We house all of the state level fire programs, and I'm the chief of wildland fire management. So I'll move through this fairly quickly. So if we could go to the next slide, then. Just reviewing 2025. Really, kind of a key was it was the busiest year we'd had in Colorado since 2020. You can see those notable incidents there. Lee kind of came in at the fifth largest fire in history. The Turner fire over in Mesa County. What was notable about that was it lasted about 8 to 10 weeks, and then we had the elk fire also in Rio Blanco County, and then I put the Stoner Mesa fire on there of note just because of kind of the high elevation there down near Telluride and some of that kind of activity. Again, it looked like we were going to really kind of have shades of 2020 and go all the way into the fall last year. Thankfully, and it was drying out into the central mountains away from the west slope toward the eastern plains. And then thankfully, a lot of that precipitation came in late August, early September, kind of shut down the fire season. Unfortunately, also caused some flooding in southwest Colorado. So Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and just kind of some stats. You can see here again, it was a busy year, in particularly the West Slope, and then in particular, Byhome County or Rio Blanco County kind of got hammered with a couple of those large fires. And in particular, Rio Blanco had 3 of what we call state responsibility fires, where it exceeds that local county's capacity, and then we as the state kind of come in and pay for it in management. And it's the first time in my memory that I could remember a county having 3 of those kind of fires at the same time. So we'll move on, start looking at 2026 if we could. Next slide. These next 2 slides are what energy release components. It's one of our key indicators of the fire potential that we use as we go through the year. Kind of they're pretty good for 1 to 2 weeks at a time, but really what they do is kind of show you that potential. Like I said, a fire. It's based on location and based on fuel type. And you can see here this spring we were riding above the 90th and even 97th percentile for that time of year on the Front Range. And if we could go to the next slide, I think it shows a little bit of the West Slope as well. Same kind of thing. You heard that from Russ based on, the climatology, the weather, the heat, all of that. Really seeing elevated fire conditions for that time of year. And really in Colorado, as you all know, we have fires on a year-round basis, especially it's not unusual even in the winter to have grass fires, where there's no snow cover. What was unusual, I think, about this winter was we were getting increased size. We were having fires in January and February where we needed to respond with aircraft. And then in particular, it was really starting to move into the brush and the timber, the heavier fuels, much earlier in the year than we usually see. And what we were saying was, in March, we were having June type fire behavior in timber and brush fuels. So, kind of that's where we're at there. Move on to the next slide, please. So these outlooks are issued by the National Fire Center up in Boise on the 1st of the month. This was a previous slide that they had issued back at May 1st. And really what you could see is, this is for the above normal large fire potential outlook into the summer. And what was forecasted to happen then was for May to go from that busy period that I just showed you down to average fire potential. And it was due to a couple of things, finally, getting some green up in the live fuels to kind of moderate that fire spread, and then some of the projected precipitation. So that really came to fruition as you heard from Russ with the precipitation. Really things really kind of chilled out for a little bit there and continue to do so. And if you could go to the next slide, basically it's the same things. This is hot off the press, so to speak. These were issued this morning. You can see there what I was talking about in May, where Colorado dropped back to normal. You can see there in June that forecast mostly held the same to what it was we were looking at before, with that fire potential moving to the central mountains and the western slope of Colorado. Then as you go down into July, you see that spreading further and further west. The other notable thing about July was Florida and Georgia were not in those original outlooks in May, and that's changing there. And then you can kind of see what we're looking at as far as we go into August. So go ahead and move to the next slide, please. And Russ covered this much better than I could. I think for us, from a fire standpoint, we're looking at or wondering, what's the heat going to do versus how much precipitation do we get? What is that? Is the ongoing drought going to be more prevalent versus the monsoons? What Russ said, and really the strength and the duration of those monsoons really play a big role for us. And really just kind of checking and keeping things in place as best we can. And then go to the next slide, please. And actually the one after that also. The drought outlook. And the reason I show this, obviously there's a very close tie to the outlooks I showed you earlier. But what this I wanted to show just quickly how this on the national level can kind of affect us from a wildfire standpoint here in Colorado. Last year was a moderately busy year. Several of the geographic areas around the country were kind of busy all at once, but nothing too crazy. when you look at those large fire outlooks that I showed you a while ago, if we get multiple geographic areas like us, the Southeast, Northern Rockies, Pacific Northwest, California, the Great Basin, all having elevated years, it's going to be problematic. And what happens is we go up in our preparedness level scale. If we get several of those geographic areas that are experiencing, upper end years, we really basically we run short of the resources that we need, particularly things like hand crews, aviation, and incident management teams. And we get into a competition and a resource allocation situation where we may need 20 of one type of resource in Colorado, and they'll come back to us and say, hey, there's only 5, figure out where you want to put them. So that's kind of why we look a little bit outside the borders as we go through the fire season year and year. And then next slide, please. And let's see, one more slide, if we could. We already covered that pretty well. And then here's again those ERC, the charts that I showed you earlier with the 90th and 97th percentiles. Here's what we're looking at right now, as best we can tell for June, which really matches very well with what Russ just talked about when you look at northern Colorado versus southwest Colorado. And really that's kind of where we're focusing or starting to focus a little bit more attention on possibly moving resources down there as we start to move into June. If we get those elevated temperatures and things from there. So again, really just looking at, how strong is that green up right now? It really, helped us out, like I said, in May. How strong is that to start lasting through the summer? And then really where do the monsoons come in or not, and kind of keep things at bay as we go through the core fire season. So I'll go ahead and stop there unless there's any questions.
Are there any questions for Vaughn?
I have a question. Great presentation. Is pine beetle? I've heard different things. It can increase the risk and it can decrease the risk. I guess it's the stage of disease, but is that taken into account the risk?
Oh yeah, when we do overall risk and planning, it certainly is. Yeah, and just briefly, I think most of we had the pine beetle outbreaks previously in the central mountains and across the higher elevation mountains in lodgepole pine and other places. The difference now is it's getting ready to really expand on the front range in the ponderosa pine fuel types. There's mixed data on what it does to the fire risk, short-term fire risk. I think it elevates it a little bit in the short term, when we have the trees dying. And then later on, really the bigger thing, the bigger problem is as those trees begin to age or die, get weaker and start to fall over, it really makes it more of a hazard for the firefighters from a safety standpoint and be able to access areas. So it has a little bit of an increase. Really, to me, it's more indicative of the widespread forest health and fuels issues that we need to try to address across the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vaughn. Any other questions online? All right, if not, then we will pivot to agency report outs. So I think we can stop our screen share for a moment and get our speakers up. First will be Department of Natural Resources.
Thanks, Kat. In the interest of keeping the meeting moving and maintaining time for discussion later on, I don't have much of an update, but just want to express thanks to you and the entire team at the water supply planning section. It's an enormous amount of work that organizes meetings in the store. Really appreciative of all the work that goes unseen. So thank you.
Thanks. Okay, next up we have the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Lauren Riss. I'm the director of the CWCB. And I wanted to start just by highlighting a couple of the administrative things that the team under Kat has been doing since the task force launched. We did develop the Drought Task Force website. Hopefully everybody here has seen that and has access to it. And that really serves as a hub for all the meeting materials, including the meeting summaries, relevant updates, and then additional job resources. We also led the coordination of the pre-task force meeting communication and built all the agendas and have distributed
updates and briefing emails to all of the task force members. And then we also continue to facilitate the Water Conditions Monitoring Committee. Thanks to Emily Adred for leading those monthly meetings. The last virtual meeting was on May 19th. And those really help us all monitor the drought and water supply indicators around the state, and they are open to the public. So just a reminder that that's a really excellent resource. Other updates, we've continued to coordinate and support the Municipal Impacts Working Group and the Wildfire Risk Working Group. I believe you'll hear updates from these groups later in the meeting. And just as a reminder, we really have tried to identify and leverage existing groups and networks to, just make these most efficient within staff capacity limits, and then to avoid any redundancy in extra meetings. And then an additional effort, thanks to Katie Lehman, our CWCB, she's here, our CWCB Communications Director. She's led a communication team across all of the agencies that are involved in the task force to coordinate on messaging and communication needs for the task force, and she'll also provide a bit of an update about this effort later on. I also wanted to make sure that everyone knew we had been working on developing a new page on engagecwcb.org that allows the public to submit drought stories based on current conditions. And this is really an effort to kind of track what's going on the ground and make sure that we really have that connection at the local level, and just really provide a good perspective of what people are dealing with. So if you have any questions about that, how to do that, you can reach out to us on the side. I also wanted to make sure everyone was aware that somewhat coincidentally, we've been working on a drought website that's based on an Esri Experience Builder tool. And thanks to Corinne and others that have been working really hard on that. It's a really beautiful page, I can say. It has lots of great pictures and is really, meant to kind of provide a drought 101, including some drought history and what the state's responsibility is as for response, and some of the drought resiliency efforts that we've all worked on leading up to the current water year. I have the website, although it is quite long and difficult to verbalize. So if you're interested in getting that link, we can send it around to folks. And I think it's connected to the Drought Task Force website as well as a resource, right? I don't know if it's on the Drought Task Force website, but it's on CWCB's drought page. Perfect. Yeah, I think that's all that I have. But just thanks to everyone, especially on the CWCB staff, for all of their hard work in setting up this meeting. So thank you guys. Thanks, Lauren. And then we have Division of Water Resources next.
Thanks, Kat. I'm Tracy Kozloff, Deputy State Engineer, Division of Water Resources, and our agency is Colorado's agency that directs water use under the priority system. And my update is pretty similar to the update I gave in the last two Drought Task Force meetings. Water commissioners, they keep doing their work of administering the streams in accordance with the priority system. In many cases, we're seeing a call far more senior than normal. Of course, as I reported in the last two meetings, it was unprecedentedly senior in April and early May, meaning that only the most senior water users in some areas were able to divert water, and many water users who normally would have had water at that time of year were unable to divert. In the recent couple of weeks, with precipitation in certain areas of the state, as Russ talked about, some of that seniority has relaxed, at least for days at a time, and so that's been helpful for some water users. But we are expecting that as we have some drier periods again, we're going to go back to having calls more senior than usual, and having many water users unable to divert. GWR leadership, we're meeting with our staff around the state, at least weekly, sometimes more frequently, to understand what's happening on the ground. Of course, we're very well versed in administering the priority system and communicating with water users about when they're out of priority so they can't divert. But we're just in some cases seeing conditions we haven't seen before, and so needing to react in ways that we haven't reacted to before, or communicating with water users who maybe have always been able to divert and now cannot. So we're just trying to keep a pulse on that and making sure we're ready to adapt to these unprecedented conditions. We do have a situation we're looking at closely where we think there may be water users in certain areas of the state who normally divert under plans for augmentation. That means they divert out of priority, but they provide a replacement supply of water that makes the senior water users whole, and so it prevents injury. There may be some situations where those replacement supplies of water will not yield the amount of water that was contemplated when they got decreased. And so we are having, at this point, pretty much informal discussions, reaching out verbally to some of those water users where we think they may not have replacement water supplies yielding, and talking to them about considering finding alternate supplies of replacement water and applying for what's called a substitute water supply plan, so that they can find water to continue to divert and also prevent injury. We do have the authority to issue emergency substitute water supply plans, or SWSPs. We can do that pretty quickly. Bypasses the normal 35-day comment period for a traditional substitute water supply plan. And so we're going to continue those discussions with water users. We may end up sending out some more formal notices to water users that we don't typically communicate with in a normal water year, to suggest that they look and make sure they're going to have adequate replacement supplies for their augmentation plans. So we're still working through that process right now. With that, that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Tracy. Next up, we have Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
Good afternoon, everybody. Matt Nickel, Assistant Director for the Aquatics Branch. Director Clellan sends her regrets. She's at the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies meeting in Boise. Similar to other agencies, ours update is somewhat similar. We'll continue to monitor the fisheries and recreational impacts. For example, in the Arkansas Basin, Bureau of Reclamation forecasting just 1,700 acre feet of West Slope imports this year, well below the 56,000 acre feet that typically is on average. So consequently, the Fry Arc project water won't be available for the voluntary flow management program. So likely not hit the 700 CFS target for summer rafting in Salida, with flows projected as low as 200 CFS. So it's going to be a tough boating year, I think. In addition to watching the river flows in the Arc Basin, we're also had some issues with water supply for our fish hatchery there at Mount Chavano on the South Arkansas. Flows dropped by nearly 2/3 in a week, and so we had to quickly move to stock about 40,000 catchable trout, quite a ways earlier than we typically would have. So we were able to get those stocked out and available to anglers. And it, I think potentially the good news is that there has been a good angling season so far for both our lakes and our streams, but we're anticipating some shifts along that side too. So also we continue to monitor algae blooms at And in particular, two of our state parks, Cherry Creek and Bar Lake, are both experiencing toxic algae blooms much earlier than we typically see them. The good news is that the blooms aren't producing toxins at this time, so we do continue to monitor them, and we put signage up for the public to keep themselves and their pets safe. And if we see those start to produce toxins, then we'll put up signs to ban people from the water. We continue to monitor fisheries, especially in lakes where we know that they're going to dry up. I think you're all familiar with Antero. Denver Water closed that a couple weeks ago, and so the latest one, though, is at Nenoshi Reservoir in Kiowa County. That salvage order went into place today, and so we're allowing the public to go and harvest fish without bag or possession limits there to try to utilize that fishery the best way we can. We also are looking at water in the San Juan Basin, and in particular, the San Juan Basin Recovery Implementation Program was asked to consider voluntary reduction to 500 CFS base flows on the San Juan. This is a proactive move to decrease the likelihood of major shortage at Navajo in 2027, which is predicted if dry conditions persist. So reducing those base flow recommendations will likely result in ecological impacts and operational impacts to field work and recovery efforts, but it may help prevent a shortage in 2027. And then finally, while the impacts we're highlighting today are real and the challenges are there, our staff are working hard to monitor both fisheries as well as recreational boating, and hopefully be able to extend those seasons at least a little bit with the new moisture that we've gotten. So I will stop there, Kat.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, we have the Colorado Department of Agriculture up next.
Thanks, Kat. Hi, everybody. This is Robert Sakata from Colorado Department of Ag. Share my screen, but I'm sharing everyone. Commissioner Greenberg is online. We're going to kind of tag team this. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So going over the.
Are you sharing the screen on?
Yeah,
online?
I'm not sharing it. I didn't know if you got my message or not.
I got you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unlocked Nate. I have 23 PowerPoint slides that I'm going to share. Really to relate some of the impacts, of course, that we've heard this before, is animal care concerns are leading to a lot of reduction in the herd size, both from just them being able to find drinking water for the animals, but then having to haul water in from long distances, and then just a shortage of feed, and a concern that it's not going to be enough feed to go around. As Tracy said, those farmers that are using irrigation water, the shortages that they're going to feel, and it's probably going to most likely get worse as stream flows begin to go down even further. So a lot of farmers aren't planning everything, just minimizing the risk of what they can handle. It's really interesting. We're hearing about infrastructure failures from some of our canals and systems that are now dry. So whether their animals are getting access to them now, or whether they've just dried up. In fact, that we're seeing some failures of there. Whenever there's a storm, all of a sudden we'll have a ditch blowout or something. So something that we didn't expect, but I think that we're gonna have to keep track of. And then, as Matt said, water quality concerns. We actually irrigate out the South Platte just below Denver, one of our canals, and we have a screening system to keep out the moss. That is being plugged up with Alodia pondweed. Essentially, every hour somebody has to be there to unplug it, or we won't get the water through our canal system. So it's really interesting, the water quality concerns that are popping up now because of the water short, the reduced flows and the increase in temperature in streams and rivers. Next slide, please. Click again. So we've been working with our emergency management team, again, training all our staff, be prepared. Next slide. These pretty quickly. Our Colorado State Conservation Board, of course, with all the 72 districts across the state, really heavily involved in reaching out to our producers. Next slide. These are some of the activities, and you can find these on our calendar that we put together on our Colorado Department of Ag Drought webpage. So we've got a calendar there. So if any conservation districts or if any of you have events that you'd like to have us posted on that calendar, you can find out what things are going on. So for example, this Saturday, the White River and Douglas Creek Conservation District is going to be having a meeting on managing rangeland for drought and resilience. So there's a lot of activities going on, trying to keep track of those. Next slide. Again, these are some of the other activities going on across the state with our conservation districts. So next slide. And then our soil team, they just had a learning lab in Hotchkiss. They had great attendance, as I mentioned before. I think really this year finding out that maybe all that work that we did on soil health is going to have a benefit. And so I think it's going to be a great reminder of how important it is for us once we get through this, is really to focus in our efforts and really provide support that everything that we can do to improve soil health across the state. Next slide, please. We had our Ag Drought Cooperators meeting. We'll update you more on that later on in the program today. Next slide. And then, as you know, I always try to follow up that with all the stress that our ag producers are going to be feeling, we're really trying to concentrate on providing mental health, behavioral health support. So if there's opportunity for us to go out there, presenting on our common training or just talking to individuals, don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time. Yeah. You can stop sharing, and then Commissioner Weaver, comments from you.
Great, thank you, Robert, and great seeing everyone. Not much for me to add, apart from what Robert updated on, but I do just want to say, just thank you all for the great collaboration. Of course, tough times in ag right now. I don't need to tell that to this group, but we are sort of tracking stress around the state. I mean, not just impacts, but stress on crops, stress on livestock, stress on people, and how we can help navigate through this time together. I'll also be joining the drought tour tomorrow, along with Evan Cavanis, who's our conservation division director and a rancher in Bayfield. She'll be presenting on the bus tour. So if you're able to join, please look forward to meeting Evan. And she's living the drought right now. And also what Robert mentioned, the many years of investing in sort of upfront resilience, soil health, et cetera, are paying off in ways that we've anticipated, but you don't know until you know. And in a year like this one, it really matters. And also thanks to Marissa Rudolph on our team, our outreach director, for her work in coordinating with our ag cooperators and the drought landing page. Lots going on this front, and just glad to have a little bit of time today. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Greenberg, and thanks, Robert. Go ahead.
One more follow-up I forgot to mention. And I did bring some, we have our farm fresh directories. I think more than ever this year, we really want to get the message out there that Colorado is still open for business. And we really want people to support local agriculture. This year, more than ever, if you can buy directly from a farmer or rancher, that's going to be so soon. So, thanks.
That's a great message to post on. Next up, we have the Department of Local Affairs.
Good afternoon. Yeah, this is Ann Miller from the Department of Local Affairs, Colorado Resiliency Office. And our regional managers still are working very closely with local governments and tracking some of the planning and resiliency planning and water supply, voluntary mandatory restrictions, et cetera. One area we brought up at the last task force meeting was the kind of economic impacts and wanting to engage those voices in the Drought Task Force as well. So we will be meeting with our partners over at the State Office of Economic Development and International Trade, or OEDIT, later this month to get their input, in particular, to the tourism office as well. Kind of a bright note, I think we mentioned that we had engaged with a regional economic development district in Southwest Colorado, Region 9. And they were very interested in being proactive around messaging to visitors. And I just found out today that they just recently, last month, released this very innovative, creative music video as a communication to tourisms to, yes, come visit our cities and counties and natural areas, but do so with, conserving water, following local fire restrictions, and supporting local businesses. So I will drop that in the chat. It's very short and very snappy and fun.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks for mentioning that video. That sounds really, really cool and fun. Be a bright spot, I'm sure. And last up, we have Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
So I mentioned last month that we've had a number of water system breaks that have led to community issues. Bright side is we haven't seen any more of those since the last meeting. However, we have seen with those previous incidents, the code one, and I'll get that acronym wrong, has been very helpful for those communities to help spot additional leaks in addition to the one that prompted the local emergency. And while any individual community is fairly small, it still contributes to an overall solution. And I think we will be out of the State Emergency Operations Center and our field team recommending those options to local communities just for additional checks on their system. I don't recall receiving any additional declarations from counties over the past 4 or 5 weeks, anything along those lines, but we are keeping track of those as needed. And I think most of the rest of what I would have, I'll be covering in my presentation a little bit later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, at this stage, we are going to transition to a presentation from Ben Felt at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Ben will be providing his presentation virtually on the effects of drought on fisheries recreation and fisheries management in Colorado's Northwest region. Thanks for being here, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good afternoon, everybody. And yeah, my name is Ben Felt, and I'm a senior aquatic biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And today I'll be talking about some of the effects of drought on fisheries and recreation and on our fisheries management as an agency within Colorado, but also with an emphasis on the Northwest region as well with some of the projects we have going here. Next slide, please. You can go ahead on the next slide. Perfect, thank you. So I'll open just with some background on fisheries management in general, and I'll start by defining what a fishery is. And a fishery is a system that's made up of 3 main interacting components. And those components of a fishery include the habitat, which is the physical environment that the fish live in, and also the people, which are any users of that fishery resource or that water body, and then also the biota. The biota consists of any living organisms that are within that ecosystem. And what we do as fisheries managers, which is a lot of the work that we do as an agency and as aquatic biologists, is managing those 3 different elements to meet either biological or recreational objectives for specific water bodies throughout the state. So next slide, please. And some of the tools that we have as fisheries managers or things that we can do to actively manage these waters is, first of all, managing the biota. A couple of options there is we can stock desirable fish species. On the flip side of that coin, we can also remove undesirable fish species. And then we can work with that second component of a fishery, the habitat, by improving habitat. And we can also work to improve water quality and quantity. Of course, that's pretty tricky to do at times, especially when there's drought conditions. And then working with people is a huge part of what we do as an agency and as aquatic biologists, whether it's education and outreach efforts, or also the development and enforcement of fishing regulations. And all aspects of a fishery and fisheries management are affected by drought conditions. So I'll go ahead and pull in some examples from the Northwest region. Next slide, please. So we'll start in the lower Colorado River, down in what's called the 15-mile reach of the Colorado River. And this is a stretch that's in the Grand Valley that's especially vulnerable to low flows because it's located just downstream of a couple major diversions in the Colorado. And it's also upstream of the Gunnison River confluence. And it's also a stronghold for native fish, both federally listed native fish, as well as some non-listed fish species. Next slide, please. And we did see that the flows in the 15-mile reach dropped to 52 CFS earlier this spring, which is a pretty alarming amount of water to be in the main stem Colorado River. We were able to get out there and monitor that fishery with some electrofishing efforts during those flows. And overall, the crews actually found that the fish were in good condition, but they were fairly concentrated in the pools in that habitat and really limited passage between those pools based on the low flows. So this is certainly a situation that we'll continue to actively monitor. And if flows drop again and fish start to become stranded, we may need to consider some sort of salvage efforts out there. Next slide, please. So moving upstream into the Middle Colorado River now, the Middle Colorado River includes several high-profile trout fisheries with the Colorado River, the Eagle, the Crystal, the Frying Pan, and the Roaring Fork. So we actually pretty regularly implement voluntary fishing closures in these fisheries during drought years, just based on this combination of there sometimes being the high water temperatures, low flows, and also very high angler use. And something else that local staff is doing in this area is they're working with local watershed and angler groups to really prepare some collaborative public outreach materials to proactively work to safeguard those fisheries during these drought conditions. Next slide, please. And sorry if there's a little bit of background noise here. But moving upstream into the Upper Colorado River is the big story in the Upper Colorado is that the reservoirs and trans-basin diversions up there have reduced the flows and flow regimes that the Upper Colorado would traditionally have. And the situation is that the natural morphology of the rivers in this part of the state just don't align with the reality of the flows that are in those rivers. And that can cause some habitat issues and temperature issues. And then those concerns can become more pronounced in drought years. But we do work with a really cool group called Learning by Doing. And this is an active partnership between us and water providers, the county, the river district, and TU to really work collaboratively to address setbacks in Grand County's aquatic environment. So do a lot of monitoring of conditions and habitat work to work together to try to address those aquatic concerns in the Upper Colorado. And then one note related to this part of the state as well is that Williams Fork Reservoir is going to be closed to boating in 2026 due to the drought and low water levels. Next slide, please. All right, now moving over to the lower Yampa River and the White River. There was a call that was put on the White River in March, and that has resulted in some challenges in refilling both Rio Blanco Lake, which was drained completely a few years ago, and Lake Avery, which was more recently drained. Both of those lakes were drained for outlet and dam repairs, and we are actively working on rebuilding those fisheries, but there's some uncertainty that remains on both the water management and fisheries management at both of those lakes based on these drought conditions. And Lake Avery is really important for the White River flows because releases from Avery help to bolster summertime flows in the White River through an in-stream flow loan program. And this likely won't be an option in 2026 based on the call that's on the river and the low water levels in Lake Avery. So that's certainly something we're keeping in mind. Next slide, please. And a lot of the work that we do in the Yampa River and White River basins is related to the recovery of native fish species in those basins. And as active partners in the Upper Colorado River Endangered Fish Recovery Program, we do a lot of work to benefit native fish species, including conducting some non-native fish control efforts. And we have found this year that low flows in both the Yampa and the White are limiting the amount of effort that we can get in those river systems, just based on there's not enough water to launch the rafts or the jet boats. And what we anticipate is that if there are reductions in electrofishing efforts, that likely will, combined with low water levels, that likely will result in some increased densities of some of these non-native fish species that we're managing against moving forward. Next slide, please. Now moving upstream into the Upper Yampa River, The Stagecoach Tailwaters, which is located right below Stagecoach Reservoir in the Yampa River, has had a flow-based mandatory fishing closure in place since last October. And Stagecoach Tailwaters is an incredible fishery, very, very popular. And what we found is that when flows drop below 40 CFS, it results in significant crowding of the fish in there, and they then become very vulnerable to angling, and we can see increased levels of angler-induced mortality. Next slide, please. So what we do at the Tailwaters is we partner with the Upper Yampa Water Conservancy District, as well as the Colorado Water Trust, to collaborate on releases out of Stagecoach. We fairly recently met with the Water Trust about some water that they have in the reservoir and the strategy on how and when to release that. And we decided to wait till later in the year to release that water. The Water Trust made that decision to ultimately hedge our bets a little bit and still have that water available when the conditions could be even more critical in the Yampa. And something that we've also partnered with the district to do is taking an experimental approach to releases out of Stagecoach to assess the habitat quality of the tailwaters at flows that range from 20 CFS down to 12 CFS, and just really figured that this would be a good opportunity to learn how habitat quality changes with some very unprecedented flow levels down there. And that information is critical for looking at what the minimum release recommendations would be for that fishery. Next slide, please. And what we're also seeing is that the drought conditions, both with the warm spring and the low snowpack that a lot of folks have been talking about today, it is resulting in some very unusual timing for several projects that CPW is conducting in the Northwest region. What we're seeing is that the ice came off most of our reservoirs a good 4 to 6 weeks earlier than usual. And that throws off a few things where a lot of the work that we do in the spring is aimed at removal of invasive northern pike. Northern pike spawning timing was way earlier this year with that early ice out. And what we're expecting happens there is similar to what I was talking about with the Yampa, is we'll likely see some increases in northern pike numbers just based on our reduced ability to be out there that early when the pike were spawning, just completely unprecedented in terms of the timing of those fish. Next slide, please. So now kind of zooming back out and talking about some of the statewide concerns, similar to what Matt was talking about. The warm temperatures and low flows that we're seeing across the state are likely to get more pronounced as we get into the summer months. Fish stocking at some waters is likely to continue to be affected, whether it's due to temperature or water quality or access for stocking. I think we will continue to see that some of our work that we have planned will likely not be possible due to low flows or temperature concerns. We are going to see a shorter boatable season on most of the waters throughout the state, which has been mentioned already. And then finally, I think overall, there's just going to be a higher potential for fish kills this year based on the drought and issues with water levels and temperatures and water quality. Next slide, please. So we are working to monitor conditions across the state. CPW is actively monitoring flows, temperatures, and reservoir levels, and any conditions that jeopardize public access to a water or the ability to stock fish in that water, we're keeping track of in an internal spreadsheet. And we're also maintaining a watch list that's a spreadsheet of all the really critical aquatic resources we have across the state, whether it's native fish waters or high profile sport fisheries, keeping an eye on those and what mitigation options we may have if some of these potential conditions are realized in these waters. Next slide, please. So some drought mitigation options that we have is, first of all, salvage has been mentioned already. We have a couple options with salvage. We can either have a public salvage where bag and possession limits are lifted off of waters to allow anglers to harvest as many fish as possible. We can conduct agency salvage as well in some situations where we move fish from one water body into another water body or into our hatchery system. It's worth noting that there's a lot of stocking considerations and disease testing requirements that apply to this situation. So something we want to be very mindful of where we do these efforts. We can also implement mandatory or voluntary fishing closures. And like I said earlier, those aim to reduce the amount of angler-induced mortality during these especially stressful periods. And then finally, we can either purchase water or collaborate with reservoir operators on release strategies that provide the biggest benefit to the aquatic resources. Next slide, please. So I do want to mention too that there's still going to be excellent fishing opportunities in Colorado this year, where as an agency, we manage over 6,000 miles of streams and over 1,300 lakes. So there's still going to be fishing opportunities, even if some of these waters do have fishing closures in place. There's still going to be opportunities, whether it's in, alpine lakes and warm water fisheries are a good example of where there's still going to be opportunities, but certainly not closed to fishing or anything like that. There's going to be a lot of good opportunities out there. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, drought conditions have affected the timing of a lot of things across the state and within the region, including the timing and magnitude of runoff, fish spawning timing, and also some of the timing of the projects that we've had this spring. And we do expect to see more disruptions and potential impacts to the aquatic resources during the summer months, but we are working to closely monitor conditions and implement mitigation measures where we can to help, mitigate these drought effects. And there still will be excellent fishing opportunities that are available throughout the state. Next slide, please. I wanted to close on a hopeful note here where I just wanted to mention that CPW's awesome team is working hard throughout the state to monitor and mitigate the effects of drought. As has been shared already in this meeting, there is, some hope on the horizon, hopefully with, El Nino conditions in the state, and even some of the recent rain that we've received has helped to some extent. So, just do want to say all hope isn't lost, and we have an incredible team. Next slide, please. But we have an incredible team of aquatic biologists here for CPW that's just doing incredible work throughout the state during some pretty challenging times. But with that, I will stop there and happy to answer any questions if we have time.
Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions for Ben? All right, seeing no questions, we really appreciate this presentation and the insights you provided. And I think we all commend you and CPW for the hard work that you're doing in these relatively unprecedented conditions. So thank you very much. Okay, now we will be pivoting to a conversation around phase 3 of the drought response plan. And as a reminder, right now we are in phase 2 of the drought response plan, and Chris Sorensen from DHSCM will be providing more information to the task force about what is needed in order for us to enter phase 3, which is the last phase in the drought response plan, and what can be accomplished and recommended by the task force in phase 3. What a drought emergency proclamation could look like, executive order protocol, opportunities and challenges, and more. The task force will then have the opportunity to ask questions, discuss, and deliberate about making a recommendation to the governor to move to phase 3. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Chris.
Okay. All right, let's just move right on to the next slide. I want to touch upon this very, very quickly. So over the past 3 months, we've been gathering a lot of information. If we do get to a point where we're recommending an executive order and that's approved, I'll need that information to work with Gov's legal team and OSPB in order to provide the legal basis for the governor. As a reminder, we do not currently have any funding with what has been established so far up to phase 2. If you have agency budgets that allow for that, you can certainly expend those, but no outside funding is currently available. Let's move to our next slide here. This is for reference. So we've mentioned quite a bit the Colorado Enhanced mitigation plan. It is many, many hundreds of pages. If you'd like to zero in, there are 14 pages of interest starting on 788. And the chart you cannot read on the screen is on page 799. That is the phases. So that gives us some basis to work with. And let's move on to our next one. We'll be talking about what we can do state agency wise, and that will include the executive order process. We'll touch a little bit on what the federal agencies can do, as well as a presidential declaration if we should choose to make that recommendation. So let's move to our next slide with state actions. So obviously, our discussions can make that recommendation to the governor to move into phase 3, and that would involve a governor's proclamation that's referenced in the eye chart that was from the previous slide. There was also the memorandum that moved things from phase 1 to phase 2. The proclamation typically is something that raises the public awareness, and the memorandum actually gives some more direction what state agencies are expected to do, at least in the governor's view, separate from the executive order, but they all play together. We still will be looking for those needs, the gaps, and the solutions that will help form the basis of an executive order if we are going in that direction. Executive orders can include funding, may not always include funding, and we'll look a little bit more at this. Waivers are something that are pretty typical from past executive orders. Robert, you mentioned concerns about hay and so forth. One of the things that we can do is write a waiver in for oversized loads, hours of service for the drivers, length and height, as well as weight. Those are things that can be written into an executive order. If you see a more urgent need, also the Colorado State Patrol has intrinsic authorities to do some waivers as well. If you need more information, please let me know about that. Executive orders can also give additional direction across state agencies' expectations on steps they may take. Now let's move on to the next slide and delve in just a little bit further into executive orders. For anybody who's interested, I will be presenting about a 45-minute to an hour executive order course for the State Emergency Operations Center, which has a virtual option. Wednesday, we go into quite a bit more detail. Just reach out, we'll have you added to the invitation. Executive orders are valid for 30 days. They can be issued verbally, however, that's typically for exigent circumstances. Typically for drought, we would be going to a written order. Either one is valid for 30 days, but they can be renewed. And if it's related strictly to the funding component, that funding is typically available for 72 months, even if that were needed on the order. The order is going to talk about the allowed response, recovery, and mitigation activities. It's not necessarily going to go into a lot of detail, but it will provide a framework for decisions to be made. And those are typically done in the State Emergency Operations Center, but they are done in coordination with the impacted agencies. The State Emergency Operations Center will not be the lead agency. That'll still remain with the Water Conservation Board. Will provide any and all support as it relates to other state agencies. I mentioned CSP just a little bit ago. If there's coordination that needs to be done there, we will help facilitate any and all of that. So we're not going to take the place of what the board is currently doing. There is no need to do that sort of thing. And I did reference the oversized loads. That is certainly one thing that we've seen in executive orders over the past 7 or so years. Those transportation waivers, not only for drought, but for other situations. If there are other statutes or rules that anybody identifies where there would be a need for a waiver, please bring that up, because we can write that language into it as well. That can apply to a number of areas, some more challenging than others. Procurement waivers are an area where we could potentially issue a waiver. The Office of the State Controller prefers not to do that sort of thing. And of course, we want to remain still inside of being fiscally responsible to the taxpayers. However, those kinds of things can be addressed as well. This will activate the state emergency operations center, particularly under the state emergency operations plan. What that will do that may be of benefit is it gives the authority to my boss, Trevor Denny, who is the director of the Office of Emergency Management within the division, to task any and all state employees and agencies with things related directly to the response that's being covered by the executive order. We use that sparingly, but if an agency has capabilities and is somewhat reluctant, we do have that ability to provide additional encouragement, put it that way. And I will re-emphasize, executive orders may include funding. They do not necessarily come with funding automatically. But in the process of drafting, I will be looking to everybody here for inputs as it relates to funding and budgets, not necessarily down to the absolute line item, but we need to have some basis that I can talk to OSPB and say, we're not just asking for 10 million or 5 billion or whatever the number may be, that these are the things that we've identified. These are our best estimates at a high level on what these kinds of things would cost. At the same time, there are additional things that we need to keep in mind. Number one, over the past 15, 16 months, the legislature has cut $2.5 roughly billion from the state budget. So a lot of things have been tightened up. Second is we do not have exclusive use of the disaster emergency fund, the funding that is authorized by an executive order. There will be many other disasters over the course of the summer. And if Chief Jones is still on the line, he's my big competitor when it comes to accessing funding in the disaster emergency fund. And it'll be a race to see who gets to it first. Not really, Chief, if you're still on that. And the State Emergency Operations Center will keep track of all the costs that are related to anything done under the executive order, which means we must be aware of all of those actions before they happen so that we make sure that we're staying within the funding cap. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to pass any value judgments on items, although we may recommend alternatives to accomplish exactly the same thing in a way that is more fiscally responsible. It'll still be up to the board as a whole and the task force as a whole to understand what those options are and make a solution there, and then we'll proceed from that. Now let's move on to our next slide related to federal agencies. So disaster designations can certainly be done. Two of the very common ones are the Department of Agriculture and the Small Business Administration. And correct me if I'm wrong, did Secretary Rollins just issue another designation for Colorado in the past couple of weeks in addition to one a couple of months ago? I may be mistaken on this.
I believe there have been multiple so far this year, so I think that's correct.
So nearly every county in Colorado is probably covered under a designation from USDA and a follow-on from Small Business Administration. They target two different aspects of impacted producers, businesses, communities, and so forth. Those are done under the individual agency authorities, and they can help provide access to both the technical assistance as well as certain types of emergency resources that the agencies may have. And I would defer to expertise, particularly out of agriculture, to speak to some of those. We can do that separately. Now let's move on to the next one with the Presidential Disaster Declaration. This can be done by the governor's authorized representative, which in this case, I believe should be vested with Division Director Kevin Klein. Tribal councils can also make direct appeal. They do not need to go through the state. There are pros and cons to that. They can actually approach the state and and go as a whole, but they also have some abilities to work on their own as sovereign nations. As of the most recent update of the hazard mitigation plan, which was in 2023, there has never been a presidential declaration of drought. There was a whole effort about 2 years ago by Western governors to make an appeal for that, and that was not successful. If there's been something since 2023, I'm not aware of it at this point. What I'm getting at there is it is not the most likely to get a Stafford declaration as it relates to drought. However, if that is granted, it would typically be for public assistance. And by public assistance, what I mean there is related to state and local governments, not individuals in the community, not producers and so forth. And in particular, all the categories that are available, they're really only going to come with, by default, the emergency protective measures, which might be most applicable to us, but also debris removal. And I'm not sure that that applies well in a drought scenario, but I wouldn't rule it out. There are other categories as well, but we'd have to make a very strong case for those categories. Many states are not currently well positioned for any kind of presidential declaration, so you need to keep that in mind as well. So for our final slide here, I'll reiterate on the couple of items here. Funding, if any, is going to be subject to a lot of limitations and restrictions. We have the opportunity to try and shape that when it relates to the governor's executive order, but it is up to the governor to make final determinations there, including how much money would actually be allocated. We should be really careful about describing in as much detail as we can the actions that we want to take, the outcomes that we expect in taking those actions, the resources that are needed, particularly if that is outside of our agency's intrinsic capabilities if we're going to the private sector, and the expected expenditures. And I would encourage all of us to continue sharing information, but most importantly, asking questions of each other. So we may have solutions that we don't know to offer up, or we don't know that there are solutions out there. So always continue asking those questions. And with that, I will just ask that we go to the final contact slide. That is a really fast level overview. If you'd like to know more, contact information is on the screen, and I will draw attention to the spelling of the last name. There is an S-O-N in the state. She works for another agency, and she will not necessarily be able to assist with executive orders.
I mean, misfired emails before you started specifying that.
Oh, I started getting very confidential information sent to me instead of to her. I started forwarding that on. I think we both pretty well have done this for the past decade.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. That was fast and there's a lot of information to take in. So I would maybe just offer the opportunity for anyone to ask questions before we launch into more of a discussion. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Really helpful presentation. Just, I want to make sure that I'm as clear as I can be about the differences between a governor's memorandum to state agencies, a proclamation, and an executive order. And so I'll maybe repeat my understanding and you can confirm or.
Sure.
So a memorandum from the governor of state agencies could direct the agencies to take actions that are already within their existing authorities.
Yes. Yes, it's very good.
It could also formally move us into phase 3 of our drought response plan.
Correct.
Which is a sort of prerequisite to some of the other steps we were talking about.
Yes, that's correct.
A proclamation could do those similar things while also formally declaring a drought emergency, maybe more publicly saying as well.
That's correct. What I've come up with is that the proclamations really help the public at large understand the direction that we are going as state agencies and making join with their own efforts. They may set out some thoughts and ideas for the public to undertake that would be complementary to the things that the agencies are doing.
Thank you. And then an executive order is only required to the extent that we would like to mobilize funding and or waive existing statute rules or regulations.
Those are two very important aspects, but the executive order can also be used to provide that additional directive to state agencies. I've seen that done in the past, both as separate executive orders under non-emergency situations, but also included inside of emergency situations. If you go back through the 300+ executive orders for COVID, there are a number of those that actually spell out agencies, you will do this in order to support the response.
Thank you. And so maybe a follow-up question is, as we're assuming this group makes a recommendation to move to phase 3, how, from a process perspective, how long might we need to be in phase 3 collecting information on funding gaps, collecting information on regulatory issues before making subsequent recommendations around funding or an executive order?
It's an interesting question. Thank you for challenging my thought process. I would answer that in two ways. If we feel like we have sufficient information right now to move forward in a number of areas, it would be possible to do something virtually immediately. But I would also suggest that if collectively we feel like we do have that, but there's more, I would want to package that together. This administration, particularly in the governor's second term, encourages being as expansive as possible in executive orders to avoid amendments. It's not that they won't amend executive orders, but they would prefer that thorough thought process, the thorough outlining of what is needed and what the basis is, so that we can avoid going back time after time after time. And if we can get that as close as possible the first try, particularly as it relates to funding. So if again, standard executive orders under this administration are now set to funding availability for 72 months. So if there's no changes to any other terms, we don't need to go back for renewals because we do have the spending authority over the 72-month period.
Thank you. That's very good. Can I ask one more question? I don't have it.
No, go ahead.
As we are evaluating potential policy solutions or funding, is it most appropriate for us to work with you to determine what sort of level of engagement that needs from the government office? Is that the best process for us to go through as we're determining what do we need his signature on to make a certain action happen?
Process-wise, I will typically contact governor's legal team, and if we even have a vague idea of funding OSPB right up front, just to give them a heads up, and they may pose some additional questions, so I can act as that initial point of contact and bring the broader group together, so the questions are coming from Gov's office, from OSPB, and getting to those subject matter experts rather than being a constant intermediary and slowing the process down. But I'm happy to serve whatever role is necessary. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you probably covered part of what I was going to ask, which is really about the state's emergency disaster funding. Can you just explain a little bit more? And I feel like I've heard this explanation in the past, and I just can't remember kind of where that funding all comes from and how certain cash funds are designated. Just kind of what that means and what that looks like.
Okay. So the executive order is going to make reference to the disaster emergency fund, which does not have any funding in the long bill. It is effectively zero. Technically, there's a balance to it from past disasters and so forth, but it does not receive an annual appropriation from the legislature. When an executive order identifies the amount of money needed for the disaster emergency fund, there is also a parallel instruction to transfer funds from the state emergency reserve cash fund. Don't know what the current balance is on that, and that is relatively new. That was something that was established roughly 4, maybe 5 years ago. It was during the COVID period. Prior to that, we were doing things like rating the control maintenance trust fund, which is the money that's used to keep state facilities up to date and so forth and so on. I don't know that any state facilities suffered due to that, but we did pull quite a bit of money from that inventory. So now anything that is allocated is first going to come out of the cash fund. If we exhaust that, and again, I have zero idea what the balance is on that, then we may start looking into individual agency budgets, at least with the executive branch. I have not seen that done, although I think we were extremely close during COVID. There may have been bits and pieces of shuffling things around and so forth, but that would be a next line. That's one thing that we keep in mind for any type of disaster in the Emergency Operations Center is asking for what is truly needed, not just a very large pool of money. It does two things. It keeps the funds available for other uses, but it also helps us avoid rating other state agency budgets. And the example I use in the state EOC is we're $1 million short, and we decide we collectively decide that we're going to make that up through $1 million out of Department of Corrections. What are the cascading impacts on that? Does that mean we cannot hire sufficient people to provide oversight of offenders or something along those lines? So we want to meet the needs, while also being conscious of what are the cascading impacts.
Right, so I guess the takeaway is that there's not a huge sum of money sitting in a balance that we could draw on for emergencies. There are really clear consequences across the executive branch depending on how funding is drawn from different agencies. So it's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There is a commitment by the governor and the legislature to meet emergency needs and so forth, but unlike the federal government, we do not have access to an unlimited pool. We do have to maintain a balanced budget.
Right, okay, thank you for that refresher.
Thank you, and I think Tracy had a question.
Thanks, Scott. Until you gave your presentation, Chris, I wasn't aware that the waiver process or the executive order could actually change statute. So I don't think that's really made a big change in my mind, but it does make me want to think more broadly about what kind of direction we might want to suggest would be appropriate in the executive order. One thing I'm thinking about is that those substitute water supply plans I was mentioning earlier that might be needed for water users to add a different source of replacement to their augmentation plans, those come with a $300 fee. That's in statute, and that would not be problematic for a lot of larger organizations, but maybe some small groups of homeowners that find themselves in this position. Just coming up with $300 might be a barrier, and so that's one thing I'm thinking of. Would that be appropriate for us to suggest as something we would want to waive?
Absolutely, that is certainly something that can be done. I do want to provide just a little bit of clarity. The executive order doesn't change statute, it temporarily waives statute, and there is a bit of difference there. I would also suggest, if you think for the $300 fees that you were just citing there as one example, that all of the entities that need that waiver would do so within the 30 days, then we're probably in a very good position. If that is an item that we need to continue on over a longer period of time, we would need to keep that in mind as it relates to the 30-day renewal process and so forth. And if it is the only thing that would drive a renewal. There may be some hesitation to actually do a renewal for just
Sure.
that type of, waiver.
These are great questions. Are there any additional questions online or in the room? Well, I think that as a group, we should consider, I think that a memo was shared, the draft memo was shared with this group to potentially move into phase 3. I think it would be beneficial to discuss if we think that that's something that we would want to do in the near future, or if we have enough information to take that next step at this point, and if we were to do that, how would that look? So I think with that, I would open the floor to anyone who has strong feelings one way or the other on that.
So I'll maybe speak up first and say, I think that moving to phase 3 and declaring a drought emergency is something we should do as soon as possible. I know that the drought response plan specifies certain actions that are associated with phase 3 or must take place during phase 3. I think obviously those are recommendations we would need to carry forward, but I would really love for this group, so I think brainstorming sort of already begun, but I would encourage the group to think beyond sort of the bare minimum required under phase 3 and think through what recommendations we feel confident could have positive impacts now. I think that doesn't preclude us from coming back in the future for further actions, especially related to funding, but I would love to think through more aggressive actions that we could take in this move to phase 3. And I have a couple thoughts, but we'll go just on the threshold question, we move to phase 3 to another last China.
Tracy.
I guess I'd just like to mention when you look at the eye chart that Chris had posted about the severity indicators, I wanted to note that one of them is the SWASI, the Substitute Water Supply Index, and that is a data product that the Division of Water Resources, my agency, normally produces, and we are having a technical problem with producing that, so my apologies to the Drought Task Force that we don't have that data point to consider. But what the way that SWASI is calculated at this time of year is it's a combination of the volumes of stream flow forecasts at certain locations and reservoir storage at certain locations within a particular basin. And you look at those volumes and you compare them to the historical volumes over, I think it's the last 30 years. You essentially get a percentile from that total volume compared to the historical, and then you smush it into the scale of +5, I think, to -5. And so if the SWASI were at a very low -4 to -5, that would be an indicator according to this chart, that it might be appropriate to move to phase 3. So I say all that, again, to say I'm sorry we don't have a data point. One of the big pieces of SWASI is that stream flow forecast. And we do have data about stream flow forecasts, which indicates that they're extremely low this year. You know, it's very low across the states. Other folks in the room maybe know the details more, but it tends to be on the order of 20 to 40% of normal. You know, normal would be 100%, so it's very low. Reservoir storage, which is the other component of the SWASI, is much more variable around the state. Some locations have strong reservoir storage, while some, again, is some reservoirs are at unprecedented low conditions. We've got Green Mountain Reservoir, for instance, which is really critical for West Slope water users, has never experienced the low conditions that we're seeing right now. And so so I do think that water-based condition of drought is indicating that phase 3 would be would be reasonable based on the water situation.
Does anyone else have information to share or thoughts on the question of whether we're ready and have that information to move to phase two? And I'm looking online too to see if there's any commentary there. The Drought Task Force is not governed by Robert's Rules of Order situation. So I would just ask for an informal poll in the room of Drought Task Force members to raise their hands if they feel that it's appropriate at this point to move to phase three or to, move our memo forward. All right, I see 5 hands up. One time they're really looking. Okay.
You don't get to vote.
Yeah. All right. And online, please show of hands as well for Drought Task Force membership. Thank you, Matt. All right, I'll take your tentative hand for now. Robert, it sounds like we have general consensus to move to phase 3. So thank you very much. And with that, I want to ask if there are specific thoughts about. Obviously, we've heard about waiving the $300 fee potentially. Are there other specific ideas or waivers that we would want to be considering as we move in that direction and consider writing an executive order and proclamation?
I would suggest or maybe ask the group for their thoughts on the idea of some form of watering restrictions on state-owned properties. Many that are in communities that have already entered stages of drought restriction may already be under watering restrictions, but I think, under the governor's purview, if we were to accept the recommendation, we could direct state-owned properties across the state to enter watering restrictions. I think we probably need to spend a little more time than we have left here to talk about the specifics of that. We'd likely want carve-outs for, functional turf. I suspect there's some state-owned properties that have children's baseball fields or that sort of thing on them. Also for, the first year of seeding of new native plants, maybe providing more water. So I think we want to see some potential carve-outs, but and a distinction between non-functional and functional turf. As a general idea, how would folks feel about the recommendation to restrict watering on state-owned properties?
Personally, I think that would carry additional weight with at least a segment of the public to take their own individual steps to do the same type of actions for own property.
I agree. I think it's a good suggestion for the state to be an example of really thinking about what is needed. We don't want plants to die, but what's needed without using more than what we need. So that's a nice idea. Nate, I wanted to ask along those lines, but really quite different. Some state agencies are water users outside of landscaping. I think what you're talking about is landscaping around our state buildings and that type of thing. And I don't know if there's been any thought around any direction to state agency water users along those same lines. And again, there's probably a really wide range of the way that water is used. I can think the Department of Corrections owns water rights where they're direct water users. Parks and Wildlife owns water, again, I think for a variety of water uses at our hatcheries and for different purposes. And I imagine that our state agencies are already, considering the wisest use of their water, but maybe worth us thinking about. Is there any way to still use what's needed, but be even more mindful of the way that water is used? I don't know the answer to that, but I guess it's worth us thinking about.
Yeah, and to be clear, what I raised was specific to outdoor landscaping, not those other uses you described. But I agree. So continued discussion of that broader way.
Yeah,
that'd be smart.
It's hard to just make a broad proclamation without considering the wide array of the way that's hard. The wide array of the ways that state agencies use their water rights.
Are there any other thoughts from task force members online? If not, I think we could move forward as staff to help advance that conversation about what that would look like in an executive order down the road. But I think what I'm hearing today is that we will move forward the memo to move towards phase 3. Thank you. I think that's the extent of the time that we had set aside for this conversation. I'm just going to pause and check with Emily and Jenna. Do you have anything else that we needed to cover in that conversation? Are we okay to move the ad hoc report outs? Okay.
I just have one clarification around the agreed upon action of moving forward the memo. Also wondering if that includes the proclamation as well, the emergency proclamation. If that's something everyone.
In saying yes to moving that forward, I assume that those were connected. Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't clarify.
No, that's okay.
And maybe it's worth following up on, but I also think potentially including some of these actions we discussed in that memorandum could be useful.
That sounds good. We can work on including those, share it with the task force. Assuming that assuming everyone's okay with that moving forward, then we can go to the proclamation.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. Okay, I think next we'll switch over to our report outs from various task force impacts groups. And first I'll turn it over to Emily Adrid for an update on municipal impacts work group.
Yeah, I'll just make the update quick. On May 27th, the Colorado Drought Coordination Group held their May meeting. 29 water providers of varying sizes across the state shared updates on their drought conditions, their drought responses, and local impacts. Jenna and I were both there. We provided an update on the Drought Task Force. One specific question that we got about the Drought Task Force was regarding whether there is a metric that the state would like to see used to measure water providers' success in implementing water restrictions this year. And I think it's a great question, and the CWCD can provide or can consider this question during upcoming updates to water efficiency plan guidance for providers, which include best practices for conservation and efficiency. Overall, there were reports of high participation in local conservation programs with demand reductions noticed. I think recent precipitation also accounted for some of that reduced demand. Some entities are targeting significant usage reductions up to 20% for municipal operations in public spaces. Providers are at varying stages of their drought monitoring and response. Most providers are at stage 1 or 2 of their drought plans, which typically involves 2-day per week watering schedules. A lot of, or some providers, larger providers use advanced metering infrastructure or AMI to increasingly better enforce watering schedules. And some providers also implemented drought rates at this time. So that's all from that group as of right now. I think their next meeting is at the end of June. So I'll have more updates at the next meeting.
And that next meeting will be shared with the task force for on calendars. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, I think next we turn it over to CDA to provide an update on the agricultural impacts work group.
Thanks, Kat. So Friday we had our second ag drought cooperative meeting. I think we had close to 40 people in attendance. Russ presented on the drought monitor he's formulated each week. So thanks, Russ. I think that was very, very informative. Got good positive feedback on that. And we'll continue. We're planning to offer you more observations that we see across the state. So those can be incorporated in there. And then our next meeting will be June 24th. And just emphasized our calendar of events that we had, and then also that we also have on our website where people can submit impacts for what's going on. And we had a quick question, I hate to go backwards a little bit, but if the governor does have a proclamation on this, do we have a joint information group then that will be formed? Because I think how we move forward on messaging, the comms part of it will be important. So we've been chatting back and forth about the structure of that. Do you have any idea how that will work? Does that come out of the Nixon office or CWCP still handle that, or?
I'm not aware if that's like that would be automatically formed, although I think that our communication staff could probably pretty nimbly move in that direction. I don't know all of what is included in joint information. I'm sorry, repeat the full name.
Joint Information Center, yeah.
Center, yeah. I don't know all of the pieces of that, but I think it would be something that our communications team, they're already in coordination, could probably explore more.
Thanks. It might be something we can pursue. So again, so we're staying coordinated on all our messages and then our responses too. Thanks.
That's I'm glad you went backwards on that. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and then the last update that we have is from Katie Lehman on the wildfire group update. I believe Kate is online.
Yeah, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can.
Perfect. So our drought communications group continues to meet, which brings together communications professionals from all Drought Task Force partner agencies and some others. And then more recently, to support the wildfire impacts working group efforts, we've expanded those conversations to include the communications leads from the Division of Fire Prevention and Control to help ensure that drought and wildfire messaging remain aligned throughout the season. So a key focus of those discussions was really strengthening the drought resource network that we've already built through the task force. So we're working to incorporate additional wildfire related resources into the partner agency drought pages that exist already, with an emphasis on both pre and post fire resilience. So that mostly includes, information on available grants, technical assistance, planning resources, and other services that can help communities and water users, even landowners and individuals and local governments, to reduce risk before a wildfire, and then of course in recovery afterward. So we've also expanded the resources available on the Drought Task Force landing page. I can reshare that in the chat just so everyone has it. But then in addition to linking users to the main drought resource pages across the partner agencies, we've added some new materials and consolidated drought related news releases as well from across all associated agencies. And then, moving forward, we're just planning to continue all these conversations and continue building out the resources and updating information as the year evolves. So, we have, per the comments for the agricultural group, we have multiple ag comms folks in that group. So I'll be sure to, continue that communication with Department of Ag and everyone involved as well. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any questions for Katie? All right, I think we can move on now. In the interest of time, we're coming up against the end of our meeting. We can review the next steps that came out of today's meeting. I think we've got a slide. We're almost there. We go. Look at there.
That's all that.
Okay, the next steps based on today's discussion are that the task force recommends that the governor that the state move to phase 3 with the drafted memo and additions based on the discussion today, including the state facility irrigation limits potentially. We will also share CWCB's Engage CWCB site and drought platform links, as well as CDA's drought event Google Calendar, just a couple reminders, the Water Conditions Monitoring Committees meets monthly. Its next meeting is June 16th. And you can get a more in-depth presentation from the Colorado Climate Center and other partners at NRCS there. And finally, the meeting summary of this meeting will be posted on CWCB's Drought Task Force website. And our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for July 23rd to give us a little time after the holiday in July. And for those of you who are here, we're looking forward to seeing you tonight at our reception and tomorrow at the Drought Tour. Thank you very much for being here and for all your work in the space.
Thank you.
Thank you.